The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. Its members were the oldest, wisest, and most powerful species in the known universe, empires that had risen and fallen before humanity had even discovered fire. They believed themselves untouchable, unchallengeable, the unquestioned rulers of every star system in their domain. And for millennia, they had been right. No species dared oppose them. No world refused their demands. No civilization had ever disobeyed a tribute order. Until Earth. The demand arrived without warning. On a quiet morning over the skis of Earth, the Council's flagship, a colossal station the size of a small moon, appeared in orbit. Its arrival shook the governments of every nation on the planet. Its silver hull reflected the light of the sun like a god descending from the heavens. And from that god came a message, broadcast to every screen, every device, every pair of ears on Earth. Attention, species designation, humanity. You stand within the domain of the Galactic Council. As is customary for all new civilizations under Council protection, you are required to provide tribute, resources, labor, and loyalty as payment for your continued survival. The message was cold, mechanical, delivered in a tone that carried no emotion. It listed demands like a grocery list: 50% of Earth's mineral resources, annual shipments of genetic material, and conscripts to serve in the Council's fleets. Refusal, the message warned, would result in corrective actions. On every continent, humanity reacted the same way: silence. It wasn't the silence of fear. It wasn't the silence of surrender. It was the silence before a storm. In Geneva, the United Earth Assembly, a council formed decades ago to unify humanity's voice on the galactic stage, convened in emergency session. The room was packed with representatives, generals, scientists, and historians. There was shouting at first: anger, disbelief, fear. The stories of what happened to those who disobeyed the council were well known. Whole civilizations had been erased from history. Others had been enslaved, their homeworld stripped bare. But humanity was different. The scars of their past still burned in their blood, centuries of war, oppression, revolution, and defiance. Empires had tried to crush them before. Tyrants had tried to control them. And every time humanity had risen, bruised and bloodied but unbroken. The delegates argued for hours, but the question was never whether to resist. It was how. General Marcus Hale, head of Earth's Unified Defense Command, spoke first. "They think we're weak," he said, his voice deep and steady. "They see our single planet, our small fleets, and they think we'll kneel. They don't understand who we are." Dr. Aisha Rahmani, chief historian of the Assembly, nodded. "Every empire that's ever tried to make us bow, from ancient kings to global conquerors, learned the same lesson. Humanity kneels for no one." The room grew quiet as President Elena Marquez stood. She was a small woman, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many wars, but there was iron in her spine. "We are at a crossroads," she said softly. "We can submit and survive as slaves, or we can stand and risk everything for freedom. Our ancestors faced this choice 1,000 times. Every time, they chose to fight. I will not be the first leader in human history to choose otherwise." There was no vote. There was no hesitation. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would not pay tribute. The reply was drafted that night. It was sent the following morning on a secure channel to the Council's orbiting flagship. The Council expected bargaining, begging, perhaps a desperate plea for mercy. They received one word: no. That was it. No speeches, no conditions, no apologies. Just no. The message rippled through the galaxy like a supernova. No one had ever refused a tribute order, not in 10,000 years. No species had ever dared defy the Council so openly. On distant worlds, governments held emergency sessions of their own. News networks replayed Earth's response over and over, their anchors speaking in hushed, fearful tones. To many, humanity's defiance was suicide. But others, species long ground under the Council's heel, watched and felt something stir within them for the first time in centuries. Hope. On the Council's homeworld, deep within the towering spires of the Galactic Assembly Hall, chaos erupted. The 12 High Chancellors, leaders of the Council's most powerful species, shouted over one another. Their primitives, snarled Chancellor Varrock of the Crothal Dominion, crush them and make an example. They have spirit, hissed Chancellor Lyra of the SVAX Coalition. Dangerous spirit. If they refuse us now, they may refuse us again, and others might follow. The council's speaker, an ancient being known as Sathal, raised a clawed hand. Silence fell. Humanity is young, Sathal said, his voice slow and measured. They do not understand the order of things. We will remind them. What of their fleets? Asked Lyra. They are not without weapons. Sathal's eyes glowed faintly. Then we will break their fleets. What of their armies? Disciplined, Varrock sneered, but small. Then we will crush their armies. And when their cities burn, when their skis are ash, when their people kneel, they will understand what tribute truly means. The council agreed. It was unanimous. Humanity would be punished not for defiance, but for daring to dream that they could say no. Back on Earth, humanity prepared. Factories roared to life. Fleets were assembled. Old rivalries were set aside as nations united under one flag. It wasn't fear that drove them, it was something deeper, something older. Every child who had ever whispered, "I will not be controlled." Every soldier who had ever sworn, "I will not surrender." Every ancestor who had ever died screaming, "I will be free." Their blood ran through the veins of the human race. And now, for the first time in galactic history, that blood would be tested against the greatest power the stars had ever known. The Council believed humanity's one-word answer was a mistake. They didn't understand that no was more than a refusal. It was a declaration. The storm was coming. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy trembled. The word no echoed across the galaxy for weeks. Entire civilizations paused their lives to watch the unfolding drama. The Galactic Council, once seen as untouchable, had been challenged. And not by an ancient rival or a mighty empire, but by a single, young species from a blue planet on the edge of a minor spiral arm. Humanity's defiance was more than rebellion. It was heresy. And heresy in the eyes of the Council could not be allowed to live. But humanity didn't care about their outrage. They knew what was coming. The Council would not forgive. They would not negotiate. They would bring the full weight of their fleets and armies to Earth's doorstep. And so, humanity did the only thing they had ever known how to do when threatened. They prepared. In the underground command chamber of the United Earth Defense Council, screens glowed with star charts, fleet projections, and endless streams of data. The room buzzed with urgency, yet there was a strange calmness beneath the tension. Humanity had been here before, outnumbered, underestimated, and standing with their backs against the wall. History had taught them well. General Marcus Hale stood at the center of the room, his eyes fixed on a hologram of the approaching Council armada. Even from millions of kilometers away, it looked monstrous, thousands of ships, some larger than Earth cities, all converging toward the solar system. "They're bringing everything," whispered Admiral Sato, her voice tight with disbelief. "This isn't a punishment force. This is an extermination fleet." Hale's expression didn't change. "Good," he said quietly. "Let them come." There was silence. Everyone knew what he meant. Humanity wasn't preparing for a negotiation. They were preparing for a war that might end their species. But if they were going down, they were going down fighting. On Earth, the call to arms swept across every nation, every city, every colony. Old flags were lowered. A single banner, the silver and blue of the United Earth Alliance, flew over every government building and military base. Former rivals became allies overnight. Borders dissolved. Humanity, so often fractured and divided, had become one. In the factories of New Shanghai, Orbital shipyards churned out warships around the clock. On Mars, engineers installed new planetary defense cannons. On Titan and Ganymede, colonies volunteered to serve as forward bases. Even civilian industries shifted gears, farms grew emergency rations, universities taught emergency medicine and engineering, and transport companies offered their fleets for military use. But the most remarkable change was in the people themselves. They were afraid, of course they were. The Council's reputation was legendary, yet beneath that fear was something far stronger, a fire that had burned since the dawn of their species. Humanity's story was one of resistance, against nature, against oppression, against impossible odds, and every man, woman, and child on Earth knew the truth. They might not survive the coming storm, but they would never bow. Meanwhile, far beyond the edge of human space, the Council prepared as well. Their fleets assembled in the Trivaris sector, a storm of metal and fire waiting for the order to move. On the bridge of the dreadnought Imperius, Chancellor Sathal surveyed the growing armada with a mixture of arrogance and unease. "They are fools," he hissed to his advisors. "A primitive species with barely a foothold in space, and they think they can stand against us." Yet despite his words, Sathal couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. The humans' refusal had spread far beyond their insignificant system. Across the galaxy, whispers were rising. Other subjugated worlds, beaten, taxed, and bled dry by the Council, were watching Earth with hungry eyes. "What if they win?" one advisor murmured. "What if they survive?" Sathal turned sharply. "They won't." But the thought remained, festering in his mind. Back on Earth, preparations reached a fever pitch. Every soldier, every pilot, every ship captain knew what was coming. And yet, amid the chaos and tension, there were moments of quiet moments that reminded humanity why they were fighting. At a small airfield in the Mojave Desert, Commander Elena Marquez stood beside her daughter, Sophia, watching the launches of new defense drones into the twilight sky. The girl clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Will they hurt us, Mama?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elena knelt down, her eyes soft but steady. "They'll try," she said, "but we won't let them." Sophia frowned. "But they're stronger." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe, but strength isn't everything. Do you know what we have that they do?" The girl shook her head. "Home," Elena said. "They're fighting to control, we're fighting to protect, and that makes us stronger than they'll ever be." It was a lesson every human understood in their bones. Empires fought for power. Humanity fought for survival, and survival was a fight they had never lost. Weeks passed. The Council's armada grew closer with every passing day. Reports of their destruction spread like wildfire, colonies that surrendered without a fight, outposts obliterated, neutral fleets crushed. Every tactic the Council had used for millennia was unfolding once more. And yet, something felt different this time. Their messages, filled with threats and demands, went unanswered. Their attempts at intimidation were met with silence. The humans spoke no pleas, no compromises. The word no still hung in the void, unanswered, unyielding, unchanged. And that silence terrified the Council more than any weapon. At last, the warning came. Humanity's deep space sensors detected the first wave of the Council fleet entering the Oort cloud, the icy outer reaches of the solar system. Humanity's defenses came online. Starships took their positions. Orbital cannons rotated toward the void. General Hale stood before a massive screen showing the enemy's approach. "It begins," he said softly. Across Earth and its colonies, humanity waited. Some prayed, some prepared, some kissed loved ones goodbye, but none knelt, none surrendered, none wavered. In the final hours before battle, President Marquez addressed the planet in a speech broadcast across every channel. "They believe they can break us," she said, her voice steady and clear. "They believe their ships, their weapons, and their numbers will make us kneel. They are wrong. We are humanity. We do not kneel. We do not bow. We do not surrender. We have one world, one home, one future, and we will defend it with everything we have." Her voice rose, fierce and unshakable. "And if they come here seeking tribute, they will find something else waiting for them: defiance." The council thought they were marching toward another conquest, another simple victory. They didn't understand the truth that, by demanding tribute, they hadn't just declared war on humanity. They had declared war on the very spirit of resistance itself. And that was a war they had never fought before. The first enemy ships appeared at the edge of the solar system 3 weeks after the Council's ultimatum expired. Massive, dark silhouettes sliding out of the void, their hulls bristling with weapons that had reduced countless civilizations to dust. They moved with the arrogance of predators that had never known fear, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. From the bridge of the United Earth flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Sato watched them approach with a calm that belied the weight pressing on her chest. "They're here," she said quietly. Her words echoed across the command deck. "The war begins." Every telescope, every sensor array on Earth and its colonies tracked the Armada's advance. The Council had not underestimated humanity, they had overestimated themselves. Their fleet numbered in the thousands, an overwhelming tide of firepower and technology honed over millennia. To them, humanity's resistance was a minor inconvenience, a flicker of defiance they would snuff out with ease. But humanity had spent those weeks preparing a surprise. As the first wave of council ships crossed the Uit cloud, they encountered something unexpected. Fields of debris and ice, seemingly natural, until the mines hidden within them detonated. Entire cruisers vanished in silent bursts of plasma, hulls splitting apart under the force of human-engineered explosives. The Council's formation staggered, their perfect lines broken for the first time. "Contact confirmed," reported Commander Arjun Patel from Tactical. "Minefield Alpha inflicted significant casualties." Sato nodded. "Good, initiate Phase 2. From bases on Pluto and Charon, swarms of human-built drones launched into the dark. They were smaller and less advanced than the Council's attack craft, crude by comparison, but they were fast, agile, and numerous. They darted between the massive alien ships like hornets attacking a bear, their railguns and plasma lances peppering shields and disabling key systems. The Council ships fired back, their beams slicing through space and vaporizing dozens of drones at a time. But for every drone destroyed, another took its place. And every second they spent fending off the swarms bought humanity time. "Status of Fleet Group Sigma?" Sato asked. "Engaging on the flanks, Admiral," Patel replied. "They're executing hit-and-run strikes as planned." Humanity's warships, sleek and black against the starlight, refused to engage in traditional battle lines. They darted in and out of the shadows, targeting vulnerable logistics vessels and retreating before the Council could retaliate. It was a guerrilla war fought not with brute force, but with cunning and precision. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Council's fleets felt something they had never known: friction. On the bridge of the Council dreadnought Imperius, Chancellor Sathel's claws dug into the armrest of his command throne. "How?" he hissed as another report came in, another squadron crippled, another cruiser lost. "How are they resisting?" "They're using primitive tactics," one of his captains replied. "Cowards' tricks, ambushes, mines, swarm assaults, nothing worthy of a proper fleet engagement." "Primitive," Sathel growled, "yet effective." He glared at the tactical display. Humanity was not fighting like any species before them. They refused to stand and be annihilated. They refused to meet overwhelming strength with hopeless resistance. They fought on their terms, and the Council was bleeding for it. "Advance," Sathel commanded. "We will burn their planets to ash. Let their courage die with their homes." By the time the Council fleet reached Neptune's orbit, the battle had raged for days. Humanity's outer defenses, drones, mines, stealth ships, had taken a heavy toll but were nearly exhausted. It was time for the final line to hold. Orbiting Saturn, humanity's main fleet waited. Dozens of capital ships, thousands of fighters, orbital gun platforms, and planetary defense arrays all pointed toward the oncoming armada. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Sato stood before the fleet's communications channel. Every soldier, pilot, and commander across the system listened as she spoke. "Today," she began, her voice steady and strong, "we stand against the oldest power in the galaxy. They believe they are gods. They believe we are nothing. But they have never met humanity, not truly. They have never seen what happens when you corner us, when you threaten our home, when you demand our freedom. They think they bring us fear." She paused, and her next words were sharp as steel. "Let's show them what we bring." The void erupted into fire. Human battleships opened up with kinetic slugs the size of buildings, railguns howling as they hurled tungsten rods across millions of kilometers. Missile barrages streaked through the darkness, splitting into swarms of warheads that weaved past enemy point defense systems. Massive laser arrays on Saturn's moons sliced through the void like blades of light, burning through shields and armor alike. The Council answered with fury. Their beams tore through human cruisers, reducing them to glowing wreckage. Shockwaves rippled across the battlefield as ships on both sides were annihilated in blinding explosions. Yet despite their losses, humanity did not break. Every fallen ship was replaced by two more, every breach in the line closed with blood and steel. Down on Earth, billions watched the battle unfold through live feeds. In the streets of cities, people held their breath with every report. Children clutched their parents' hands. Veterans clenched their fists. It was no longer a war fought by soldiers. It was humanity's very soul being tested. And amid the destruction, a truth became clear. The Council might have more ships, more weapons, more centuries of experience, but humanity had something they could never understand. They had nothing left to lose, but everything worth fighting for. Hours turned into days. The Council's fleets pushed deeper into the system, but every kilometer cost them blood and metal. They had expected surrender. They had expected despair. Instead, they faced a species that refused to die. On the fourth day, as the shattered remnants of the first Council fleet retreated to regroup, Admiral Sato stood in silence, watching their retreating silhouettes. Her ship was scarred, her fleet battered, but Earth still stood. Humanity still stood. "They thought we'd kneel," she whispered. "Now they know we fight." The first battle of the Tribute War was over. It was not a victory in the traditional sense. Earth's defenses were damaged, their fleets depleted. But the message had been delivered with fire and sacrifice. Humanity would not be conquered easily. And across the galaxy, oppressed worlds that had once lived in fear of the Council looked up at the stars and whispered the same word Earth had spoken. No. The Council had won the battle, but in their arrogance, they had unleashed something far more dangerous than they ever anticipated. They had awakened humanity's fury. The first great battle of the Tribute War had ended, not in triumph, not in defeat, but in something the Galactic Council had never experienced before: doubt. For the first time in 10,000 years, their fleets had not crushed their enemy in a single decisive strike. For the first time, they had been forced to retreat. And for the first time, they were afraid. The Council called it a strategic withdrawal. In truth, it was chaos. Hundreds of their warships lay broken and adrift in the blackness of space, casualties of a species they had dismissed as primitives. They had arrived expecting surrender and tribute. What they found instead was defiance forged in fire. On Earth, the news of the retreat spread like wildfire. Cities erupted in celebration. Strangers hugged in the streets. Children waved flags under skis filled with streaks of burning debris, the remains of ships that had once seemed untouchable. But amid the joy, no one was under any illusion. Humanity had survived the first blow, but the war was far from over. The Council would return, and next time they would come with everything. In a bunker beneath Geneva, President Elena Marquez met with the United Earth High Command. The atmosphere was electric but heavy. The commanders were tired, their faces lined from days without sleep, but there was a glint of something new in their eyes: confidence. "They expected us to kneel," said Admiral Sato, pointing to a hollow map of the solar system filled with wreckage markers. "Instead, they bled. More than a third of their fleet is gone. That's not just a tactical victory, that's a psychological one." General Marcus Hale nodded. "The galaxy saw what happened. The Council's aura of invincibility is gone, and now other species are watching." He tapped a section of the star map. Dozens of faint signals had begun appearing in sectors long considered loyal to the Council. Rebellions, uprisings, small, desperate acts of defiance inspired by a single word: no. President Marquez's gaze hardened. "Then we don't stop here. If they're coming back with more, we need to meet them before they reach us. Operation Dawnfire begins now." The room fell silent. They all knew what Dawnfire meant. Humanity was done playing defense. It was time to take the fight beyond their skis. Operation Dawnfire was madness, or at least that's what many thought. No human fleet had ever ventured beyond the solar system in combat. Their ships were fast and deadly, but they were dwarfed by the vastness of Council space. Yet humanity's strength was never in numbers or size. It was in audacity. It was in the refusal to accept the impossible. In secret shipyards orbiting Luna, engineers had been building something special. Warships with new stealth coatings, experimental jump drives, and railguns capable of punching through the heaviest of alien shields. These were not defensive vessels. They were designed for one purpose: strike deep, hit hard, and vanish before the enemy could respond. The fleet was small, barely 60 ships, but it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was humanity's first true expeditionary strike force, and leading it was Admiral Sato herself. Their target was bold, almost suicidal: a Council shipyard orbiting the gas giant Lethros in the Varnes system. It was one of the largest naval production facilities in the galaxy, churning out warships by the thousands. Destroying it would cripple the Council's ability to launch a second invasion, but reaching it meant venturing deep into enemy territory, far from home, with no guarantee of return. Before departure, Sato addressed her crew. The hangar was silent as she spoke. "They think we're scared," she said softly. "They think we'll hide behind our walls and wait for them to come back. But humanity doesn't wait. Humanity doesn't hide. We strike back. We fight on our terms. And we show them that no matter how vast their empire is, no matter how many ships they send, we will never stop coming." Cheers erupted from the assembled soldiers, pilots, and engineers. They knew the risks. Many of them knew they wouldn't return. But they were fighting for more than victory. They were fighting for the right to exist. The fleet jumped out of Sol 3 days later. The journey was silent and tense, each ship running dark to avoid detection. They passed abandoned colonies, slave worlds stripped of life, and orbital fortresses that had stood for centuries. Humanity's pilots watched them with cold fury. This was what the Council called order. This was the peace they demanded tribute for. When the fleet reached Lethros, the sight took their breath away. The shipyard was colossal, a ring of metal and light larger than Earth's moon, bristling with unfinished warships and guarded by hundreds of defense platforms. It was a fortress, a symbol of the Council's dominance. And humanity was about to burn it down. The attack began in silence. Human stealth ships slipped through the outer defenses, planting charges on sensor arrays and communication relays. Explosions rippled across the ring, blinding the enemy's early warning systems. Then, from the darkness, the main fleet roared in. Railguns thundered. Missiles screamed. The void lit up as plasma fire tore through station hulls and docked vessels. The Council's defenders scrambled to respond, but they had never fought an enemy like this: fast, invisible, and utterly ruthless. "Target Beta disabled," shouted Lieutenant Vega from the Resolute Dawn. "Dock 7 is venting atmosphere, they're in chaos." reported another. The battle raged for hours, but by the time the Council's reinforcements arrived, it was too late. The great shipyard, a monument to 1,000 years of conquest, was a field of twisted wreckage and burning debris. Humanity's fleet, battered but intact, slipped back into the shadows, vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. The destruction of Lethros sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Never in the Council's history had anyone dared strike at their heart. Never had anyone won doing it. And now, a young species from a single, insignificant planet had done both. In slave camps on distant worlds, whispers turned into chants. In hidden rebel bases, flags were raised. On the Council's homeworld, panic spread through the halls of power. It was no longer a question of if humanity could fight. It was now a question of how far they were willing to go. Back on Earth, President Marquez watched the encrypted transmission of the Lethros strike. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply whispered to herself, "Now they know." The Council had believed humanity's defiance was a spark. They had failed to see it was a wildfire. And it was spreading. The destruction of the Lethros shipyard changed everything. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council was bleeding, not metaphorically, but in a way that shook the foundations of its empire. A facility that had supplied nearly 1/3 of its warships was gone. A strike team from a primitive species had done what no empire, no coalition, no ancient rival had dared to attempt, and they had succeeded. Across the galaxy, the echoes of that explosion reached places the Council had long forgotten. On a dozen slave worlds, whispers turned into murmurs. In mining colonies forced to pay impossible taxes, overseers found walls scrawled with a single word: no. And deep beneath the crust of conquered planets, resistance cells stirred, tiny embers waiting for wind. The wind had arrived, and it carried humanity's scent. On the Council's homeworld of Oraxis, the High Assembly met in emergency session. The room, a grand chamber of marble and starlight, had once been a place of calm authority. Now it was chaos. "They're not supposed to be capable of this," roared Chancellor Varrock, slamming a clawed fist into the table. "How can a species barely 2 centuries into spaceflight strike at the heart of our infrastructure?" "They are unpredictable," hissed Lyra of the S-Vax, "and that unpredictability is dangerous. If they can do this once, they can do it again." "They will do it again," muttered Sathel, the Council speaker. "And not just them. Look beyond the humans. Our control is slipping. Dozens of worlds are refusing shipments. Our tribute fleets are facing armed resistance, all because of one word." The chamber fell silent. It was true. The Council had built its empire on fear, a fear so total that no one had dared dream of rebellion. But humanity's defiance had shattered that illusion. Now that fear belonged not to the galaxy, but to the Council. Back on Earth, the mood was shifting too. The victory at Lethros had ignited a firestorm of hope, but it had also revealed a new truth. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger, for liberation, for justice, for every world crushed beneath the Council's boot. President Marquez stood before the United Earth Assembly, addressing not just humanity, but dozens of alien ambassadors who had secretly arrived on Earth, seeking alliance. "They told us we were weak," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "They told us we would break. They told us we would pay tribute or perish. And yet here we stand, alive, defiant, and unyielding. But this war is no longer just about us. It is about all who have suffered under the Council's tyranny. Humanity will not fight alone. Humanity will fight with them." The hall erupted in cheers, but Marquez's face remained solemn. She knew the cost of what she was about to do. They all did. This was no longer a war for Earth. It was a war for the galaxy. Operation Emberfall began a month later. It was the largest coordinated campaign humanity had ever attempted, and it wasn't just humans. On the desert world of Carthage, enslaved miners rose up with weapons dropped from stealth ships. On the forest moon of Nithra, A council garrison was overrun by a coalition of local insurgents and human marines. And in the nebula-shrouded Hades belt, a fleet of defectors, ships from species once loyal to the Council, joined humanity's armada. The Council responded with fury. Entire fleets were dispatched to crush the uprisings. Worlds were burned. Millions died. But with every act of brutality, more joined the cause. The Council's iron grip was slipping, and they knew it. Amid the chaos, Admiral Sato led humanity's main fleet deeper into enemy territory. Their objective was bold: the liberation of Arthol Prime, a strategic world and symbol of the Council's power. It was there that millions of conquered species had been enslaved for centuries, forced to labor in the Council's factories and shipyards. The battle for Arthol was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Council dreadnoughts filled the skies, blotting out the stars. Planetary shields shimmered with deadly energy. But humanity's fleets, supported by rebel ships and orbital strike teams, pressed forward with relentless determination. Status on the eastern flank, Sato demanded over the roar of alarms. Hold is holding, Admiral. Resistance forces have breached the surface defenses. And the planetary shield. Cracking, ma'am, another volley should bring it down. Sato's lips tightened. Then let's finish this. Moments later, the combined firepower of the fleet struck as one. The shield flickered, wavered, and collapsed. Human dropships screamed through the breach, carrying soldiers who had come not to conquer but to free. On the ground, the fighting was brutal. Streets ran red with blood. For every meter gained, dozens fell. But everywhere humanity's soldiers marched, they were joined by rebels who had waited generations for this day. The oppressed fought with desperation, with rage, and with tears streaming down their faces. One human soldier, Sergeant Layla Tran, found herself leading a column of freed miners through the burning city. "Why do you fight?" asked one of them, a gaunt alien with scars from a lifetime of chains. Layla looked back at the rising dawn. "Because we know what it means to be broken," she said softly, "and because no one deserves to live that way." Those words spread like wildfire among the liberated. It wasn't just humanity's weapons that gave them strength, it was their will. And that will was contagious. 3 days later, the Council flag over Arthol Prime was torn down. In its place, a new banner rose, a circle of stars, symbolizing unity among the free. Billions cheered, billions wept, and across the galaxy, a single truth became undeniable. The Council could be beaten. But even as celebrations erupted, humanity's leaders knew the war was far from over. The Council would not surrender. They were wounded, humiliated, and desperation made them dangerous. They would unleash weapons and armies the galaxy had never seen, and they would stop at nothing to crush the rebellion before it became unstoppable. Yet as President Marquez looked out over a liberated Arthol, she felt no fear. For centuries, the Council had ruled through terror. Now it was their turn to tremble. Humanity had sparked a rebellion that no fleet could destroy, no decree could silence, and no empire could contain. And deep within the Council's dark halls, one whispered question haunted their every thought. What happens when the species that said no refuses to stop? The fall of Arthol Prime sent shockwaves that shook the galaxy to its core. The world that had once symbolized the Council's eternal dominance was now free, its chains shattered, its banners burned, its people cheering the name of humanity. But even as fireworks lit up liberated skies and hope spread like wildfire, those who knew war understood a painful truth. The Council would never allow this rebellion to stand. They would respond. And their response would be terrible. And it came faster than anyone expected. Only 3 weeks after the fall of Arthol, humanity's intelligence networks intercepted grim news. The Council had mobilized Echelon, a weapon spoken of only in whispers, a fleet so vast it was said to blot out the stars, commanded by the ruthless High Marshal Kureth, the architect of 100 genocides. Echelon's purpose was not to win battles. It was to end wars. Entire civilizations had vanished before it, and now its course was set for Earth. In the war room beneath Geneva, silence reigned as Admiral Sato displayed the incoming data. Even the most hardened commanders felt the blood drain from their faces. "This isn't an invasion," murmured General Hale. "It's an extinction." President Marquez stared at the hologram, an endless swarm of red icons representing Echelon's fleet. "How long until they arrive?" 30 days, Sato replied. "Maybe less if they push their drives." The room fell into a heavy stillness. For months, humanity had fought like lions, daring raids, bold offensives, victories no one had believed possible. But this was different. This was the full wrath of the galaxy's oldest empire, concentrated into one final blow. On Earth, preparations began immediately. Cities converted factories into armor-plating plants. Civilian ships were refitted as evacuation vessels. Families stockpiled food and water. Yet beneath the fear was a fierce, unyielding determination. They had known this was coming. Every victory, every act of defiance, every no shouted into the void had been a step toward this moment. If Earth fell, humanity would fall with it, and so they would defend it with everything they had. Meanwhile, far beyond the edge of human space, Echelon advanced like a storm. Kareth, the High Marshal, stood on the bridge of his flagship Oblivion, watching the stars slide past. He was an old creature, his face marked by centuries of conquest. He had broken empires and erased histories, but this campaign was different. "Do you truly believe they will fight?" asked one of his lieutenants. "They must see this fleet and know resistance is hopeless." Kareth's eyes were cold and distant. "They will fight. That is what makes them dangerous." "And if they do?" Kareth's lips curled into a thin smile. "Then we will burn their world and scatter their ashes across the void." In orbit around Earth, humanity's final line of defense took shape. Fleets from the liberated worlds joined the Armada, ships old and new, patched together with scavenged parts, crewed by soldiers who had once been slaves. They were outnumbered 5-1, outgunned 10-1, but none of that mattered. This was not a battle they expected to win. It was a stand they refused to lose. Admiral Sato addressed the assembled captains over a secure channel. Her voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of steel. "Tomorrow the council comes for us. They will bring everything they have, they will try to crush us, but they don't understand what they're walking into. This isn't about tribute anymore. It's not about power. It's about who we are. We are humanity. We fight for the living and the dead. We fight for every child who deserves to grow up free. We fight for every world that will rise after us." She paused, her voice dropping to a quiet, fierce whisper. "And if we must fall, then we will make the stars remember that we lived." As the hours ticked down, Earth held its breath. Streets fell silent. Families gathered together. Soldiers wrote final letters home. The old and the young looked to the night sky, searching for comfort in the constellations they had always known. In one small home in Nairobi, a boy named Eli asked his father a question that echoed across countless households. "Will we survive?" His father knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't know," he admitted softly, "but we will fight, and sometimes that's enough." When the Echelon fleet emerged from hyperspace, the sky itself seemed to shatter. Thousands of ships appeared in a wall of light and darkness, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. The largest vessels dwarfed mountains, their superweapons capable of cracking planets in half. It was a sight meant to crush hope before the first shot was fired. It failed. Human ships powered up their engines, forming defensive lines around Earth and Mars. Orbital cannons glowed to life. Fighters roared from carriers like swarms of angry bees. The defenders were silent, but every heart beat with the same message: "We do not kneel." The opening salvos were apocalyptic. Beams of energy carved through space, vaporizing entire squadrons in seconds. Planetary shields flickered under the bombardment. Dozens of human ships vanished in the first hour alone. But they did not retreat. Every time a vessel fell, two more surged forward. Every inch the Council gained was bought with blood and steel. Sector 4 is gone. Lose that flank and they'll hit the orbital stations. Reinforcements inbound hold the line. The comm channels were chaos, but amid the fire and fury, something extraordinary happened. Rebel fleets, some barely more than cargo haulers with mounted guns, appeared from warp, answering Earth's call. One by one, they plunged into the fight, shouting war cries in 100 alien tongues. The Council had come to crush humanity. Instead, they found a galaxy rising to its feet. For 3 days the battle raged. Cities on Earth trembled as orbital debris rained down. Entire fleets were reduced to wreckage, yet humanity refused to break. On the third night, Admiral Sato stood on the shattered bridge of the Resolute Dawn, blood staining her uniform, and whispered to herself, "We are still here." Kareth watched from the oblivion, disbelief gnawing at his once unshakable confidence. "How?" he rasped. "How do they endure?" No one had an answer. By the end of the third day, the skies above Earth were a graveyard of ships, human, rebel, and Council alike. The outcome was still uncertain. The Council had the numbers, but humanity had something far more dangerous, an unbreakable will. And as dawn rose over a scarred, battered Earth, President Marquez addressed the world in a message broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "They thought they could erase us. They thought they could make us bow. But here we stand, bloodied, burned, but unbroken. Let them bring their fleets, their weapons, their wrath. Humanity does not yield. Humanity does not forget. And humanity does not fall." The war was far from over. Echelon was still advancing. Earth's defenses were stretched to their limits. But the Council had made a fatal mistake. In trying to break humanity's spirit, they had revealed its true strength. And deep within the darkness of space, a chilling realization was spreading through the Council ranks. They were no longer fighting a species. They were fighting a force.